This evening's sermon is called How Many Altars? And interesting that Brother William made a certain comment in his prayer this evening about wishing everyone were here, that it was the same day and still our duty to serve God. You've been looking ahead, William, trying to see what I was going to talk about. Brought it into his prayer. And, it's interesting that we think these different things and how they all come out. And that's part of what this one's about, kind of. When we look at what is in our life. Now, we don't necessarily think of it as an altar today. We don't physically go to an altar to worship. We just come to the building and we come together as a church. But the idea of an altar is what we're looking at. And we see the idea of the altar, the physical one at least, here in Acts chapter 17. And this is when Paul was going to Athens. So we got a couple verses. I'm going to skip a few because it's going some back and forth between some of the brethren there, and then back to, so I'm going to start at verse 16 and 17 and then go down to 22. Now while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Therefore disputed he in the synagogues with the Jews and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Kind of continuation of what we talked about this morning. Can God use me? And Paul was here in a location full of idols. And so he would dispute with, he would reason with, and talk with whoever he could. As we go down to verse 22, then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. Some versions may say very religious, but I think the point of very superstitious comes in very well when we look at what's going on, as he would walk around in an idol everywhere, a whole row of altars. For as I passed by and beheld your objects of worship, I found an altar with the inscription, To the unknown God. Whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him I declare to you. How can you worship something that you call unknown? They are very superstitious if they are afraid they missed someone, and so they put one saying to the unknown God, or to the forgotten one that we forgot to list. If I was that God, I don't think I'd be happy already. But maybe they tried to make amends by giving me something, even though they don't know what they're doing. But he says, you ignorantly worship, I will declare him unto you. And then he gives them the sermon. God that made the world and the things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped by men's hands, as though they needed anything, that he has given all life and breathed in all things, and has made of one blood of nations of men to dwell in the face of the earth, and to determine the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also of his offspring. For as much then we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art or man's devices. And the times of this ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he has given assurance unto all men that he has raised him from the dead. Paul actually makes, not the point of this lesson here, but he actually takes a couple of pointed remarks to the Athenians, to those there, about he's not made with hands, he's not worshipped by the idols that you create, he is the creator of all things, he hits them several times about how many altars they have built in their city, how many devotions of worship, how many things they look at in their lives. Now, some things is all right to have a collection for. Sometimes I think about, look around our house. You know, how many, okay, this is a fun one Becky had it great entertainment with me and my family. How many DVDs are in your collection at the house? Or if you still have your older collection, as I've weeded mine out recently, but VHS tapes or the old videos and all these things. Do we have a collection? What about items in our pantry, books on the bookshelf, all these different collections? How many of these various things do we have in our lives? The chances are we will probably find a subject that we have a collection of. And of these things here, I don't see any issues with those. Okay, some people say I have too many, but that's okay. I like them, and I have a variety when it's time for me to sit down to watch one. But yet, they are not my altars. Because they are not my altar, they are not my focus of worship. As he said in here, your objects of worship. In verse 23, it's okay to have our collections. However, the question then becomes, how many altars do we have in our home or in our hearts? And is it okay to have more than one? The idea behind the definition of altar in itself is just a structure for the offering of sacrifice or burning of incense. That comes from my Bible, the New Analytical Dictionary Bible. A physical altar would be the structure for offering these sacrifices. In the Old Testament, they would use altars. Paul just commented about all of these items of worship that they had all around them. The offering is defined as a contribution given for a particular purpose. One of the elements of our worship gathered together is we give a contribution. We give of our means. We give financially. But that is only one definition. How else can we give an offering in our lives? Perhaps by what we devote ourselves towards? Do we not offer our time to our jobs, to our hobbies, to our other elements that may or may not, as William said in his prayer, be keeping us from coming tonight? Obviously, those of you that are here tonight are not in that category. We are all present. And there are various reasons for not being present, but we hope that they are not for chasing other idols. The sacrifice, the other element of what an altar was used for. A sacrifice can be defined as the offering of an animal, plant, or human life, or of some material possession to a deity, as in propagation or homage. Our time, our efforts, are all sacrifices that we give. It can also be defined as to surrender or give up permanent injury or disadvantage to for the sake of something else. When we use an altar, there is an expressed action that is given to that offering. When we look at in the Old Testament, as we're about to look into, there was a specific purpose for their altar. They built altars for specific reasons, and they would go to those for their worship. But as God kept trying to give them, it is also about your heart. What do you devote your time to? What do you offer yourself to doing? So as we look at the physical altar, primarily in the Old Testament, the physical altars were built by patriarchs. They were built for the tabernacle use, for the temple, and by others to give glory to God. There are also ample examples of other altars to false gods as well. We talked about that earlier this morning, about Baal and about all these other things as well. And we see here in Athens as well. The altars of the Old Testament were used for worship to God. And there is a list of them right here, and probably not an extensive or a full list. Noah in Genesis 8 built an altar. Abraham built an altar. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all individuals, the patriarchs of their family, when God gave them something big or gave them a directive or they just accomplished something, they built an altar and worshiped God. That was their thanksgiving. They didn't pat themselves on the back saying, I just survived a flood. When he landed on ground, the first thing he did was built an altar and offered a sacrifice to God. Worshipped. Abraham was given promises. Isaac, each of these. We also see altars built for the tabernacle. We also see it in Solomon's temple, and we see multiple different altars for different purposes. They were built to serve and worship and sacrifice. We have spiritual altars that we look at. Now, more today, we don't necessarily go into our backyard after a new promotion at work or after a new job or any type of a massive thing. We go and we don't build an altar, but we look at the heart. What do our spiritual altars look like? The altar stands for or represents what we ourselves put ourselves towards. What do we give our offering and sacrifice to? The offering or sacrifice could be our money, time, efforts, any number of things. What is it that we focus ourselves towards? Do we build altars to worship at today? It's said that if you show me your bank statement or credit card statement, then your priorities will speak for themselves. What do we focus ourselves towards? Obviously, we have regular bills that have to be paid. We make a living so that we can pay the bills. We can pay for all these things, for our needs. That has never been disputed in the Bible. We are to be a worker. We are to be able to provide for ourselves. But if we're not here, where are we? Where are we spending our money? Where are we spending our focus? For some, it may be a physical place. For others, it may just be where we spend our efforts. The question is, what are the altars that we could be looking at? What are these altars, these spiritual altars that we think about? Do we think about these elements as altars? I've added it into yours, but even on here, the altars of the world are to serve our own self-interest and pleasures. At some point, look at 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 17 for an interesting point about our own altars as well. But instead of looking at that one today, we're going to look at the points that are on here from Galatians 5, 19 through 21. Should sound familiar as being the works of the flesh. The works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, dissension, heresy, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like. Each one of them is its own altar. It's a spiritual altar. It's a spiritual roadblock for us to be able to serve at the one true altar of God. Hopefully we don't have these in our lives. But we know that they are in the lives of those around us, if not our own. We have to be looking at the world and the nation around us. Can you imagine being some of these people that we can read about in the Bible? Certain persons were picked out by God as being righteous in His sight in a world of wickedness. Jonah going to the city of Nineveh, that great wicked city. He was sent into a wicked area by himself. We've looked at Gideon recently, how he had to go and take down an altar of Baal on his father's own property. And all the people around were ready to be angry about it. All these things, so many times, these altars get in the way, whether they're in our lives or the lives of others. Why are the roadways so treacherous to drive upon? Someone out there may have one of these altars built and they're worshiping at it as they go down the road. We got the drunk drivers running down and tear apart the road and run into several people. Why? Because they chose to worship at their altar. And we paid the consequence because we're just minding our own business and they came into our lane. Just because it's not our altar doesn't mean we don't have to worry about it. We still have to be mindful of the world around us. All of these altars can be boiled down to a simple statement. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. 1 John 2:16. Be mindful of what is around us. Just because we are to be out of this, we are not to be in this world. We are to be above. We are to have those higher thoughts like God has. We need to remember to reach down and try and pull people up with us. Bring others up with the altar that we should have in our hearts. And it's actually okay to have multiple altars, because there are several listed here in Galatians 5:22 and 23. As we continue through Galatians, we see the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are the focuses we should have in our lives. Do we put that all on one altar and call it the altar of God? The altar of righteousness? Do we build multiple altars, one for each one, and we work on each building, each one up? I think it can be a personal choice. To work on them, it's hard to work on this many items at one time. One thing that we've seen and we've tried before, we've done it and we haven't done it in a little while, but take an index card. Take a little piece of paper and put each of these words on it. Put it on your bathroom mirror, your kitchen fridge, some place that you look every single day. And this month, start with the first one. Love. Maybe even write the definition of love underneath it and read it every day. Okay, start next month. This month's almost over, so you want to give love justice. Read it every day. Next month, change it out to joy. The next month, change it to peace. Look at each of these elements of the fruit of the Spirit so that we can grow by them by focusing, remembering what they are. For those that are devoted to God, as we look at throughout the Bible's history, what do they do in their lives? Service to God. They go to the tabernacle when they were supposed to. They go even at additional times. They take and serve. Do we go, even if we have these good altars of God, do we go to it and worship at it daily? Do we worship God in our daily life? Do we serve Him? Do we make those sacrifices and offerings every day? Every moment of each day? What is our focus? We have to ask ourselves, how many earthly altars are still built in our lives today, and do we acknowledge that they are present? I thought about adding in here, I'm just going to mention it, is think about the parable of the soils. Now the parable of the soils the farmer looks at 4 different types of soil. The wayside, the rocky, the thorny, and the good. And it looks at people in each one. Farming around here, if you have a bad area of soil, what do you do with it? Do you just ignore it and write it off as a loss? Or do we focus on it? Do we try and make it better? Even if it's good soil, we don't just ignore it and abandon it. We want to make sure it stays good. So think about that when we look at these altars as well. We want to work at them. If we have had or do have one of these older altars, it takes time to build them in our lives. It may also take time for us to destroy it and haul off the rubble. I don't even want the scraps of it still behind. I want to sweep up every last piece and haul it all off. But that may take time and encouragement. Be mindful about that and remember that as we go through our life and as we reach out to others. Sometimes we can help them break their altars down. Sometimes we can help them just not rebuild it. And there are several verses here to help remember that, to look at your time. So the real question is, at the end of this, is are we focused to serve and offer at the one true altar of God and rid our land of the false altars and gods? Look at some of the kings, look at some of the judges, look at some of the times when God's people shined. They did so because they removed the altars of all the land. That is a major task. That task came from those times from the leadership. The leaders had to do that. But it also comes from some of us encouraging our leaders as well. Some of them were just humble people that were elevated up. Some are found in the land that do not have the altars of the world. And we follow the one true God, as Paul told the Athenians in Acts. Do we serve? And luckily, we can serve at an altar that is not built, because it is not required to have one, because he does not worship with things of hands. We can worship through our hearts, through what our daily actions are. If we need to serve at the one true God, we can do so by being baptized with him. We can join his church, his way of doing things, and start breaking down the altars of our life. If we need to continue breaking those altars down, we pray the strength to anyone that needs that to be able to do so, and also offer the invitation. If you need assistance with this, if you need help, please come while together we stand and sing.